Good morning if you are in everywhere but the East Coast in America. Good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. Good afternoon or good evening if you're in Europe. Good morning, I guess, if you're in Hawaii. If you're in Hawaii, it's early for you. My name is Brian Francis. I am a contributing editor at gamasutra.com. I am a community manager with GDC. I am your host, your invisible voice who hangs out here and plays video games with you. I'm going to give a quick shout out in chat. Looks like we got some few folks in here already. We got Kthulu and Kanakiro. Thank you both for joining us. What we are here today doing, what we're here today playing, we're here playing Nowhere Profit. We are talking to Martin Nerurkar, who is down in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Martin, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. It's very warm, as you can see from my choice in the tower.
Yeah.
But it's
I can see
getting colder. It's the evening, so
I can see on your shirt there, you're wearing a GDC shirt from like 2011 because it's GDC 2011.
Yeah.
And then Alyssa, Gamasutra, Master of Words. How are you doing?
I'm very sleepy, but I am here. Hello.
Yeah, it's the tired. We are tired developers conference.
Yeah, I got out of bed very late today as well, so I feel it.
Yeah. We're going to do our best to power through that. Thank you all for joining us. Like I said, we're here today playing Nowhere Profit. It is a science fiction kind of card-based RPG? I guess you could call it an RPG. Strategy. It's kind of a strategy game more than that. So it's a mix of kind of a, you're about to see it. It is a, well, you might be about to see it. I don't know what's going to happen when I go to these crossroads. It is kind of a mix of card-playing elements with this Oregon Trail / FTL kind of narrative interludes. And Martin here is the lead developer at Shark Bomb, the company that brought us the game. Martin, while I get started on my first part of my leg of this adventure, would you mind explaining the origins of Nowhere Profit?
Oh God. So no, I don't. But it's difficult. So I kind of started with the first prototypes for what would eventually become Nowhere Profit back in 2014, like over 5 years ago at this point. And I was basically looking for an sort of an abstract conflict resolution system that could manage sort of conflict, actual physical fights and sort of social situations as well. Because I really liked stuff like in Mass Effect, when it's towards the end of the game, you can sort of convince, I think Saren was his name, from not attacking you, and he instead sort of kills himself, but then you still have a boss fight. But I like the idea of sort of going through the world and sort of winning with words instead of with weapons. So I looked at sort of abstract conflict resolution mechanics. And the first ones I sort of played around with were timing based, because I needed something that is not like shooter thing. Like thinking of a shooter and then making that map to sort of talking doesn't work for me. So I started with some timing mechanics and then sort of moved to cards. And from there ended up with like a card system that I really liked, which is in fact really different from what we have now. And then sort of built the game around it. And the world sort of came from me sort of looking into my background. So I'm half German, half Indian. So that's sort of where the Indian inspiration comes from. And I always really liked post-apocalypse, but I was bored with sort of the, I don't know, I'm just going to say white dudes in leather jackets in brown worlds. So I tried to sort of mix it up with sort of a different aesthetic and sort of have more colors in there, more colorful people, more colorful sort of a strange planet with like purple sky stuff and different moons, and that was sort of where it came from sort of initially, which is funny because I recently looked at Griftlands, I think the alpha or the beta, which is the clay card game, and they have this sort of two pronged sort of social and physical combat thing, which I had to scrap because when I was sort of working on the game, it was still the old system. It was just too much work for me because you mentioned the developer, like there's nobody else here but me. It's not like a big team, so I had to scrap the social sort of combat because it was just too much to sort of deal with two entirely different sort of decks and everything, which was a shame, but the right choice in hindsight.
Right on. Just a reminder for folks in chat, we are taking your questions. Let's see. Let me just work on this battle for a minute. I guess.
Funny thing. Like a bunch of that guy that's just dying now, that you just lost forever, is Anjin. He's the art director of the game. So there's like we made portraits of a bunch of the people that worked on the game, and I got them involved.
Oh man.
Now he's gone, Brian. Way to go.
Yes. I mean that sounds like a contradiction of sort of saying it's only me and then I'm saying that's an art director. It basically sort of to explain before anybody's confused is that I'm sort of the only full-time developer on the game. I did all the design. I did did 99% of the code. I did a lot of the writing. I did all of the interface design, but and I did a lot of the art direction as well. We did this sort of as a two-man team, but I didn't do the pretty pictures. I did very few of the sound effects, and I did none of the music. So that's all thanks to very talented people that you can see in the credits.
Right on. To continue the line of questioning. So once you sort of migrated from, you said you had wanted to do conflict resolution in a way that wasn't combat based, that wasn't shooting, that wasn't sort of moving and dodging. What made you move towards kind of this like adventure, like trekking across a landscape while managing a convoy of nomads kind of take?
I mean, that's always where it sort of started on. Like I had the general conflict system, and I wanted to put something around it, and I wanted to have a story about sort of a bunch of people, and not just like this one hero that goes and sort of does everything by himself. The early combat system I had, which eventually got scrapped, was a lot more sort of party based. Like you had a bunch of sort of special people, each had their own small decks, and you sort of had this one-on-one sort of 3 versus 3 party fights going on. And I don't know, I always liked sort of stories about community. Banner Saga really spoke to me as sort of from the narrative it kind of had, and I kind of wanted to do something that's not, I said, not about like the lone hero.
What were some of the other game design choices you felt like reinforced that decision, as opposed to and when did you sort of realize you were wandering off course and needed to get back to that?
So I mean the most important one was the old system was sort of you had a number of followers, which was pretty much just a number. Like you had 17 followers, 20 followers, and then you had these dudes that were sort of your warriors, which would have their own sort of little decks, and you know 3 of yours against 3 of the enemy. And I scrapped that because while the system itself worked, it was a fun sort of card game that I enjoyed playing and that people enjoyed playing, but it didn't fit the theme enough because all your people in your convoy were just numbers. So when I took a break at that point, sort of I was really unsatisfied with where the game was going. I could have finished it at that point, but it was just not where I wanted it to be. And then I just sort of redesigned the entire combat system, which sort of came back. I did a sort of extensive paper prototyping to solve some issues I had with the gameplay in sort of a longer term progression, but also to make the convoy matter more. And then sort of where this sort of idea comes from, that actually the people in your convoy are specific cards. Right Which on. I think the whole cards are people and sort of wounds on cards thing and blessing cards is really a sort of a very good thing that does wonders for Nowhere Profit and sort of for the deck building parts of it.
Right on. I am currently learning more about the game. As you can see, I could have hit a lot of it before getting started. Okay. I'm going to jump into my question pile for a minute. Oh man, our coworker Alex would like to point out that you have very good hair. Because he's watching this.
Thank you.
Shout out to Alex who's watching.
It's been pink for 2 days now.
Nice. We are also taking questions from chat. If you've got questions about the making Nowhere Profit, you are before the stream we were discussing. You are currently standing off the edges of some of your AI. We were discussing about how the difficulty spikes are sort of jumping a little ahead than where you want them to be. Would you mind talking about the discussion of like realizing like you'd be making an AI driven game instead of like a card? I think of a card game. I think of Magic. I think of Pokemon. I think of something I play with another person. What was sort of that process like for figuring out your games once you realized you had to be an AI programmer as well as a game designer? And how is that going?
So I mean, the reason for the game being a single player game is because I really love card games, and I currently still I play a lot of Magic the Gathering. Like I got back into it like almost a year ago at this point. I played 25 years ago. I'm like sort of like it's like a teenager in high school, and I'm getting back into it. And I really love sort of playing physical card games with people because you have sort of your local meta. And you play people and you can play in a sort of relaxed manner. You can make fun decks and sort of make interesting choices. And I played a lot of Hearthstone also sort of as research for the game, but also played a bunch of online card games before. And the issue for me was always, if you play online, you suddenly have this sort of very competitive arena that you're in, which means it's sort of like going to a Magic tournament. To compete, you need to know what the deck builds are. You need to build the perfect deck. You need to spend money or grind like my hell to get the right cards or be very lucky. And then you have a chance at competing. And that sort of sucks out the fun of sort of building the deck for me because it becomes this know the meta and play to the meta kind of thing. And I never really wanted to go there. And before I designed Lower Profit, I played Dominion. I'm not sure if anyone of you knows it. It's a physical card game that is sort of the granddaddy of deck building as a concept. It's a game where you have a bunch of cards, there's a bunch of cards on the table, and you have a small deck which you cycle through constantly, and use that deck to sort of buy stuff into your deck, and you need to buy stuff that allows you to do more things, but also need to buy victory points which do nothing for your deck. So you sort of have this back and forth between buying stuff before somebody else buys it, or buying victory points, and it's a really fun challenge of deck building. Like I don't know, it's pretty old at this point, but when I played it, I sort of got a really new access to sort of the fun of deck building, because I remember thinking back on Magic 25 years ago. I always built fun and janky decks, but I sucked at them. Like my decks were shit, and because people were building more efficient decks. And sort of Dominion, like I don't know, I guess it's 10 years ago or something, sort of gave me an idea that deck building actually can be very fun if it's not sort of the thing you need to do before and you need to do your homework and your research, but if it's part of the game and part of the resources and sort of the challenges managing the resources right and sort of, and that's sort of where this comes from. And then sort of talking about the AI, building an AI is hard. It's hard because it's super intransparent. Like the AI does things and you hope it does things the right way, but man, it's tough. I mean, my goal for the AI was always, it doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be sort of compete with sort of on a human level, because it's a single player game. It's not like a multiplayer. We're on an even footing, kind of. It needs to be match you or be boring, because the game has sort of this attrition aspect. As you play, you lose resources, so you want to be efficient in your fights, which means the AI doesn't need to be superb, but it doesn't need to be stupid. It should never make mistakes where you go like, what the hell? Why are you doing this? And unfortunately, the game launched last weekend with a bug in there, which I just actually like an hour ago fixed. That made the AI do stupid things. So sort of, I'm going to write up an announcement about that later. But sort of what it boils down to is, like 7 weeks ago, I went through and optimized the AI to make sure it runs quicker and faster, so it allows me to do more iteration. The AI basically simulates a whole bunch of moves, so it evaluates those moves and then picks the best move, and then does the same thing over and over again. Actually simulates a bunch of moves forward, so it just, if I do this and then this and then this, how good is the move? Or if I do this and then this and then this, how good is sort of that? And then it sort of evaluates the different branches. It's Monte Carlo tree search, if anyone's sort of interested in the actual sort of algorithm behind it. But there was this little bug in the game where when I optimized it, I wasn't paying a lot of attention. And so what happened was, when it would do one move, everything was fine. But when it was doing the second move, there was an error in sort of that changed the game state, and that would also always make this move look like it's more valuable than it was. And the further down it went, the more valuable the moves became, even though the move might have been shit. But the deviation from the actual game state became bigger and bigger, so that it would take moves that weren't useful just because it thought, oh, in the end it's going to be really good. And the issue was I basically had a reference to a list and was filling stuff in that list instead of copying the list and then filling the list. Happens, unfortunately. But finding that one was a bitch.
Right on. I need to do some inventory management over here. Alyssa, could I throw the question ball to you?
No problem. You had mentioned, like, as a deck building game, I relate a lot with what you're saying about Magic because I love playing just like fun decks and I love deck building, but I'm actually crap at any kind of like competitive element or like taking it beyond just like having fun with it. So that kind of like resonated with me when you were talking about deck building before. And deck building with a roguelike game is actually like a super good mix. And it's just really interesting with how you kind of merge those two elements. So I was wondering if you could talk about how you kind of fell into the roguelike elements of this game a little bit.
Well, I mean, I don't think I fell into them. It's sort of, they were always there. As soon as I had the core gameplay, I knew I kind of wanted to do a single player thing. I didn't want to do multiplayer, both for sort of pragmatic reasons, like I don't want to build sort of networking code. Also, you know, as an indie, if you make a multiplayer game and not enough people play, then it's dead in the water and it's going to be dead forever. And I didn't really want to go there. I didn't want to run the risk of sort of building something. And I also felt like it would be bigger than anything I would be doing on my own, because I knew I was going to do most of this by my own. Ended up being more, I ended up biting off more than I could chew anyway. This thing is huge. It took 5 years. But I'm glad I never picked multiplayer. And I don't know, the roguelike, I mean, the sort of the inspiration of FTL is sort of obvious from the map. And that's sort of, it talked about Banner Saga, even though that's not on a roguelike. But I think FTL really sort of gripped me with sort of the replayability, and I really enjoy sort of procedural generation. So that's kind of where this came in. I was like, all right, I really like card games, deck building games. I like roguelikes. Let's just put them together and make something cool. Speaking of the map, sort of, the map we see currently, which is this sort of very FTL-like map, is like the process of 3 months of iteration of coming up with different versions of not doing this kind of map, but doing something card-based or something different. And I just iterated away and came up with a lot of interesting sort of ideas, but nothing that really worked for Nowhere Profit. Sort of with a card game, it just ended up being too complex. And I ended up rolling back everything and going with the basic, boring map, which I know still sort of, oh man. But I mean, the map works fine. Yeah, it works. And at some point, I was just like, "Fuck! I need to stop iterating. I need to do make the game." So
that's a good question. Why did you think? Well, like you kind of just said it. Like you thought it was boring. You wanted to improve it and make it better. But I'm kind of at a point where I'm like, wait, like if it wasn't. Like there is I guess like we're all kind of, when we're making things, we're looking to hope to make the best magical thing that will be perfect in our heads. What made you think that this, you know, doing something that was sort of similar to what other devs had done wasn't quite lining up? I'm sorry, that question didn't come out great, but I'm just sort of like, that's kind of worth interrogating. Like, what made you go? What do you think is the because the version I see is super functional. I love the narrative events that pop up. What sort of makes you go, hang on, this isn't everything it could be, I guess?
Well, I mean, I've sort of made my peace with the map because it is functional and it's not the heart of the game. Like, I mean, the heart of the game is sort of the travel, but whether the map is this kind of map or a different kind of map actually doesn't make that much of a difference. Let me just sort of, for a few people that are watching, can I share the screen? I probably should be able to.
Yeah, it'll be very tiny. It'll be a very tiny screen. If you.
Oh yeah, fair enough. I wanted to show some of the sort of early concepts. If anybody sort of bought the art book, there's a bunch of early concepts on the map travel gameplay. We tried like isometric views and sort of card-based things. And sorry, now I lost my sort of train of thought.
I suppose it's kind of one of the things too when you're working as like a solo dev or like on a really small team too. You don't have that constant kind of checks and balances to be like, okay, do I need to keep developing this or is it good how it is?
Absolutely. Like speaking candidly, I'm very proud of Nowhere Profit. I'm very happy with the thing I built, but I would never do it again because I did it by myself. And I just like this, the example of sort of this map iteration, we had a lot of cool ideas. Like I did a lot of brainstorming with my art director, but he was also he was never sort of on an even level because he was freelancing. It was never sort of okay, let's talk about what's best for the game. It's more like a service provider. And we had a lot of cool ideas and a lot of like I'm looking at sort of the art book there, but I think at that point it would have been really useful to have somebody sort of butt heads with and sort of go, do we really need to do this? Is it really something that's gonna make the game better? Or is the time invested better elsewhere? Which is one of the big sort of drawbacks of doing it alone. There's nobody to sort of keep your weird, because at my heart, because you introduced me as a sort of lead developer, which sort of doesn't quite sit right with me because I'm a game designer. God damn it! Sorry. But like keeping the inner designer in check is hard. You just want to do everything perfect, or no, be innovative and have some cool new ideas, and don't do it like the other guys do it, because people have seen it.
But you'll never release a game that way.
Oh, I mean, spend a lot of time on the map, which is sort of wasted time because I ended up with the thing I started on. But I learned a lot. I had a lot of cool ideas. Maybe something of that is another game at some point.
I'm not on a lot of, I only sub in for these GDC streams every now and then, but it's kind of shocking how often you'll hear a developer be like, yeah, no, I love this game, I love what I made, but I would never do this again.
Yeah.
And yet you're kind of thinking about doing it again already, aren't you? I mean, not Nowhere Profit, but like, you're already, I mean, you're working on Nowhere Profit right now, but like, this isn't the game that makes you quit video games, if I have that right. Wow, this got really depressing.
Well, I'm not sure. To be sort of candid, I don't know what I'm gonna do next. People keep asking, and they've been asking me even before the game launched, what's gonna be next? What's next for you? And I'm like, fuck, I don't even know. Once this game is out and I can stop fiddling with it, and I still want to fiddle with it. Like I need to do bug fixes. There's still bugs coming in. I need to improve the AI. It fixes AI bug, but there's still sort of ways to make it better and less stupid. Then I probably need to do some small content updates. There's console versions, which I'm not going to make myself, but I'm sort of need to be involved in because I want to make sure the controls are right. And then it's suddenly 2020. Like, this is how it goes. And then just going to take a serious break. Because sort of the key problem on sort of the development pain of Nowhere Profit was not necessarily how long it took. I said sort of 5 years, sort of first prototypes to release, but the fact that I did it by myself. And not sort of all by myself. I had people helping, but sort of nobody sort of on an even footing, I guess. And I would never ever do that again for a project that's even remotely of that size, because it's just gonna make me terribly unhappy. So it sort of depends. Like if I end up with a team or sort of a team I can join or collaborate with, then I'd love doing something like that again. But otherwise, it's small stuff for like doing it in a different setting or surrounding, because that just did not do it for me.
Right on. I am powering up this army here. We are 20 minutes or so into our chat. We hope you folks at home are having a good time. We'd love to take your questions for Martin if you've got them. Martin, I am going to go ahead and to a different topic. I sort of skimmed over the art direction. Like you said, you had a contracted, talented contracted art director who worked with you on this. This game I think still stands out because it uses like you said earlier, it's not a bunch of white guys in dusters roaming around the desert. It's instead a bunch of multicultural, though Indian-inspired folks wandering around the deserts. Some with dusters like our heroes, some with
colored robes.
Yeah. What was, I guess, like, even though there was an art director you worked with, there was still a specific creative influence you were drawing on. Would you mind, like, breaking down some of what you were thinking about with, you said you were drawing on your own sort of, your own background, your own heritage with some of this. Yeah. Would you mind, like, explaining how you translated that, because, obviously this is not what India looks like right now, to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah. It never meant to be. Like, I never wanted to sort of reproduce India in some way, shape, or form. I know it's sort of difficult to say. I mean, the whole art direction process was like 4 months of sort of intensive sort of talk back and forth and sort of figuring out how the game should look. I sort of started the process with sort of a very strong vision already. Sort of like, I want these people to be this sort of an Indian-inspired world. I want it to be very colorful. I want it to be on a strange planet. It's sort of this sleek science fiction that's broken down, cyberpunk aesthetic. And sort of, I actually sort of the other day posted these in the Discord. Unfortunately, I cannot really share them because then it's tiny as well. I found a bunch of old PDFs of mine where I just sort of collected artwork I found on the internet. I sort of searched for specific things. start a sort of an inspiration point for what sort of the art direction would then start off on. There's a bunch of really cool stuff, like this one sheet called Humans, which is just like pictures of sort of old Indian dudes with like paint on them, and like Arab sort of head scarves and high fashion, and like I don't know, it's a bunch of interesting stuff in there. But I don't really know how I came to that starting point, because I was just, I don't know, I was looking for an interesting world that I wanted to make a world as well. Like I wanted to do so many things. Like coming off of Banner Saga, which really touched me, I really enjoyed the world, sort of exploring that world, and that's one of the sort of the points I sort of started on. I wanted to make a world that is sort of mine, sort of that's unique to me, that's interesting, that maybe I'll make a tabletop role-playing big game in this world at some point. You know, that's sort of where I started off. And for some reason, because I like post-apocalypse, and because I don't know, I sort of felt I wanted to pull some of my background in there. This is sort of where we ended up at. Funny aside, which hasn't so much to do with the setting, but sort of with the art style. In the early days, I was very sort of enamored with low poly styles. Think of something like Overland, what they have, and have a bunch of references in here. One of them is actually from the Overland lead artist, funnily enough. We actually sort of tried some 3D aspects out, but ended up with this sort of, actually by sort of going over 3D, we played around with shaders and some sort of toon shaders. We ended up with something that was very sort of black, dark, sort of shadows and sort of colors, and from then we sort of, this is interesting, but we don't want to do 3D. We sort of ended up, because Anjan is really, the art director, is really sort of a comic fan, we ended up in sort of looking at graphic novels and sort of Hellboy, which is has a really strong sort of aesthetic and sort of black shadows, very slim highlights, and we sort of used that as a cue to sort of build the visual style, which I'm really, really happy with. Sort of that's one of the things that sort of people constantly sort of give positive feedback about. The game just looks gorgeous.
Nice. I don't know why this guy's helping me out. He just pushed that rock back there.
Yeah, I fixed that bug. It's not going to happen in the future. At least I hope. Or at least let.
No, now he's pulling it back.
Oh, he's just. Oh well, that's actually clever. He's just inciting his guy. He's just playing a lot of cards because his guy gets bigger.
Oh, that's a problem. Oh, that's a problem. Okay, I need to figure this out. Anyway, Alyssa, can I throw the question ball to you?
Yeah. I'm gonna circle back a little bit, back when you're talking about everyone clamoring to find out what you're gonna do next. But in terms of your development, you didn't do an early access period. You did like a beta for a couple months, correct?
No, there was a first access starting at the end of 2017 on itch only. So it was available on itch from October 2017 to like March this year or February this year, something like that.
Okay, so how would you say that feedback in that period affected your development? Was it useful? How did you kind of parse through what you were getting back?
It was super useful. Like the game is so much better for it. I mean, the thing why I went to itch and not to Steam was sort of to avoid having a shitty Steam launch, because if you go out of early access, people don't care as much. Then I'm on Steam finally. So I didn't want to sort of run that risk of sort of being this. It's out of early access, nobody cares. And I didn't need to do the early access for the money. I just wanted to build a community and get some feedback from people. And it did a lot. Like I said, it was an early access for 1.5 years. Like one thing, for example, which is sort of obvious, is the wound system. That was sort of in the beginning, but in the beginning, followers could take up to 3 wounds and would die with the 4th or with the 3rd. I don't quite remember. And it sort of just ended up being to people who didn't really care. It just ended up too finicky. So I did a lot of sort of fine-tuning on the wound system. And sort of this is also at some point when the blessing system came in. That actually came out of a streamer that streamed a bunch of times during the first access. Plaid, and he's actually in the game because during the first access people could sort of buy the game for a more expensive price and then get their face as one of the units. The steward you're using right now is actually Inky. Is one of the people that came in during the first access, and he provided just a shit ton of valuable feedback. He's been with the game for for over a year at this point, and it's helped me sort of rebalance a bunch of times. And that's just invaluable, because especially if you're on your own, you just end up with one perspective. So having other people is really good.
Nice. Yeah, I remember, like, I don't remember where I read it, but back when early access was starting to become a thing, there was people saying, like, oh, well, you only get one launch. Like, even if you launch in early access, that's going to be your impactful moment, and there's a risk people won't care when you go 1.0. So what you did kind of mitigated that in a way, because I didn't know it was in early access because I went to the Steam page and it wasn't there, so it just looked like a regular full launch, so that's interesting.
That was kind of the goal. That's actually, if people are interested, there's a blog post I wrote up on Gamasutra blog about half a year after the early access launch to sort of have the numbers and talk about the feedback a bit. Also, one thing is sort of the blessing feature that actually sort of came out of the stream, as mentioned, because Plaid he streamed, and since you can rename followers, whenever a follower would do the killing blow to the enemy, he would rename that follower based on one of the people from his chat, which sort of gave me the idea of sort of adding value to that final blow. And making that an interesting decision, like who is on the board, who am I going to sort of time this to have the final blow, which is sort of where the blessing mechanic came from, which is really nice because it sort of interacts with the wounding mechanic. Like, do you want to put in some wounded guys, because then you can sort of, if they get the blessing because they do the final blow, they get healed for free, which saves you some resources. So that's sort of interesting as a, I don't know, as of where this thing came from, I guess.
Yeah, well, kind of like a social feature and also a strategic feature.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull a question from chat where Cthulhu wants to know if, even though the game style has changed, is there anything of the original party when they had individual decks used as inspiration for the leader classes?
Yeah, I mean, sort of from the world building, the idea of technopathy, or I'm not sure how to pronounce it even. I know English is hard. I can do it in German. I can't do it in English. I'm just gonna go with technopathy. Was there from the start. Like, there was the idea of these operators, frequency operators that can manipulate technology, and the initial sort of warrior followers you had were all technopaths. They were all sort of powered people in that sense, and they would sort of defend the convoy. And the classes, the class ideas and class names and class images are sort of still the same. Like, I have ideas for more classes because if you have 3 people, you need more than 4 classes to put in stuff. So there's some names and ideas for future profit classes, but making a class for the current iteration of the game is pretty intensive because you need a bunch of unique cards. You need to find out sort of deck builds and how to sort of put them in the different unlockables. But it's sort of like what used to be individual heroes are now sort of individual classes for the character.
Nice. How's it going, Bryant?
I am hanging in here.
Well, you're doing good so far.
Yeah, I'm making my way down desert, walking fast, faces fast, and this is where everyone starts groaning. Martin, I would like to ask you. We talked about deck building earlier and how you wanted to make deck building fun. I was playing Thronebreaker, which is the Witcher's the Witcher card game, and I was thinking a lot about deck building playing that because I've noticed that as my kind of player, deck building is a scary feat for me in games like this. I talk too much here about X-Wing Miniatures, which is a game I play where you're essentially always deck building because you're changing the ships you want to fly, and that's like building a deck. But when it comes to putting a deck of cards together that I'm randomly pulling things from and trying to figure out a combo, that is very frightening to me. What did you sort of learn about teaching players, like, hey, you should be thinking about pulling... Like, how did you teach players deck building? I'm genuinely sort of want to know your thoughts about that.
Actually, I'm not sure I'm doing it enough. There's a rulebook that sort of has a section on strategy and how to build a deck. But the game actually doesn't do a lot of sort of teaching you how to build a good deck. And it's hard, like... What's a good deck? A good deck is generally not too big because then you sort of limit your choices. I don't know. It's a good question. I don't think I have an answer for it. I think I could do the job better than I do. Yeah.
I guess
that's it. I
guess technically it's a bad question then.
Deck building is just actual magic.
Deck building, it's magic. I guess then let's talk about the individual cards. Like, where did you sort of, like, once you realized you're doing a card system and sort of, like, it's a little bit Hearthstone-y in some ways, you know, attacking a hero, a mana system, but, where did you start thinking up, like, kind of card ideas and, like, hierarchies for how these cards would work? Like, what was kind of your process for saying, like, okay, I need this kind of cards, I'm kind of curious what your workflow was for designing units as cards.
Well, there's a lot of it went through a lot of iterations. It sort of starts with, all right, what's my basic sort of attack health stat sort of relationship? Do people have a lot of health and very little attack, or a lot of attack and very little health? How sort of fragile is everything? And went through a bunch of sort of balanced iterations over the course of the game, and especially during the first access, sort of fiddling with that and trying to find something that feels right. And then there's the factions that sort of have been in the game before I did the sort of the gameplay change that I still wanted to sort of have in there. Then it was a little bit about giving them a different identity, sort of finding different parts in the gameplay that make sense to sort of build around and put them to the factions. I think that's something that also could have been done better. I sort of could have cleaned that up a little more. And I think in hindsight, 10 factions is probably sort of cluttering it up too much for the player. I just liked all of them too much to, scrap any one of them. And then it sort of, I had, I don't know, I guess 300 something units, and I had them in the first access, and then did a balancing, threw a bunch of out that just didn't work and replaced them, and sort of kept fine tuning sort of what they were and also where they belong to. And I said there's a bunch of sort of moments where it sort of just shuffled stuff around to make the faction identity stronger. It's like, all right, this guy is nice, but he needs to be over there, and then this guy needs to go over here because I need to have equal numbers on the factions because they have sort of chances to roll and that kind of thing.
Right on. Alyssa, I need to pay attention to this text. I think I'm going to throw the question but your way.
So I think I ask this, like, some variation of this question every time we do a stream with someone who has roguelike elements in their game. But the thing that's persistently interesting to me with roguelike games is that you take failure or losing a unit or something and you make it into kind of like a positive learning moment. So I guess, how did you balance with the roguelike elements in this game? How did you balance kind of that fail, like, quote unquote fail state, like punishing the player, they're losing something forever, with encouraging them to try new things and learning from their mistakes?
Oh God, so many good and hard questions. I mean, there's you don't lose everything. There's some progress you can make in the game. Like, you can unlock new stuff, and you can sort of unlock new stuff, like new perks for the convoys you have. So even if you lose something, you still sort of make some progress somewhere. Which I feel, even though like each convoy has 3 perks, and they're small bonuses in the travel gameplay. Like, you heal a little better, you sell stuff for a little bit more batteries, that kind of stuff. Nothing that has a big impact, but stuff that feels nice and that you sort of have fun unlocking. So I think that's a good sort of start to make that fail state not just feel super bad. But again, sort of, you don't want to overdo it, because then you can just grind your way through the roguelike by just getting really good by having high stats. So it's just like small bonuses. And I think sort of the audience that likes to play card games likes to sort of have interesting puzzles. Like, you start your turn, there's a situation on the board, there's a situation in your hand, and a lot of the stuff you can do is very predictable. There's some random effects, but for example, Hearthstone has a lot of sort of unpredictability to it, which makes it really good for new players because they can just win by sheer luck and they have a lot of fuck yeah moments. But for me, it's too much. Like, that's one of the things I really don't like about Hearthstone. There's just too much randomness that can just make or break a game. So sort of, you have this sort of interesting puzzle. These are my cards. This is the situation, and then you sort of look for what's the optimal play for this turn, and maybe for the next turn, and maybe the turn after that. And that's sort of always an interesting puzzle. And that's, I don't know, I think that's what the people play for. They don't play to sort of win the game. They play to have interesting puzzles and sort of have them transmute over time.
Right on. I am going to quickly give myself 4 armor. And then checking my question pile. You just sort of talked about puzzles and like stringing together combos. I've noticed that, like, when I'm trying to set up, when I'm picking moves, I'm sort of saying, okay, what's the unit that can match my energy now versus what's the unit that when I play it now and then next turn I can play something else. In your head, like, I guess, like, what was your idea? What do you think makes a fun combo in a game like this? Like, how do you... That's sort of a generic, strange question, and I apologize for that, but, I sort of think it's worth noting because you can sort of say, oh, like when I put this card down, this next card will do 3 damage to everything, and then you go, actually no one uses it because it's not even fun because for some reason. I guess that's where my head is right now.
I mean, sort of a good combo, I think, needs to feel like the player discovered it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it needs to be like, oh, if I do this and then this makes a lot of sense. Like you see this one piece that we're like, all right, this is okay, but I'm not sure. And you see this other piece and you go like, oh wait, there's these two together, you know? And if the piece says A, use B for me, and B says A, I work well with A, then it just, you know, it's boring. But it's interesting if there's like sort of, if you can find them and if they're on a lot of sort of axes. One thing I sort of found out in the design process of the cards, and specifically again sort of when I redid the equipment system a couple months back, just threw out the entire equipment system and redid it because it just didn't combo well enough. And I did I tried to come up with better effects that had more combo potential, kind of always err on the side of, all right, this thing needs to work in a way that a lot of other things can work off of it. If that makes sense. I struggle to come up with an actual example right now, but
no, I get what you mean. There's this, I play a lot of Hitman, and there's this really cool phenomenon in that game where you have these moments where you do something really cool and you're like, I thought of this is great, I solved this like big murder puzzle, and I executed this really cool thing, and then the developers are back there like, no, we actually meant for you to do that. But like crafting those moments where it feels like you did something really creative and substantial is a difficult beast to tame and kind of explain, I'd imagine. Yeah,
I mean, there's one example is there's robust units that when they get killed, they heal up. So they get reset to 1 health and they get pushed back. And if they cannot be pushed back anymore, they die. Which is actually really strong, and thinking about nerfing that a little bit. But like they get reset to 1 health, and this reset to 1 health could be just reset, but it's a heal, which means everything that triggers of heal works really well with robust units. And I think that's just making a lot of pieces that interact with a lot of pieces. Allows people to find enough of them to make an interesting deck out of it.
Right on. Just a heads up for chat, we got about 15 minutes left in our conversation with Martin. We would love it if you would ask some questions. That sounded a little more desperate than it did to me.
Please.
Oh dear, my Wi-Fi is acting up. I hope that doesn't cause problems for the stream, which is on a wired connection. Okay, cool. Looking good. But yeah, we'd love to hear your questions. That wasn't, I mean, you know, it was only a little desperate in that, like, you know, questions and gameplay can be hard. Martin, I guess we're the GDC Twitch channel. We can talk about GDC. You have a GDC 2011 shirt. Let's move a little bit outside the world of making nowhere profit. I guess, you said this year you were skipping GDC because you were taking an off-conference year, and I imagine you had to actually ship your game. That's important. How, you know, as a game designer, I guess we haven't gotten to talk about your background at all. So, like, what was your foundation as a game designer, and what made you want to make games like Nowhere Profit and say, like, I can make a cool world that's expressed through cards and numbers and have it feel as real as a book or as other things, I guess. Forgive the cross-medium comparison, if you will.
No, it's all good. So, I don't know, my background sort of, I always, like, right, so it took me a while to understand that not everybody knows what they want to do with their life. Because I always knew. Like, I was 6 years old and I was making terrible games that didn't work on a C64 Commodore in BASIC. I was making I have a sort of box with trashy, terrible roller dice to move board games and built as like a 8-year-old. I don't know. I always made games. I spent a lot of time in my high school years sort of modding Quake, which sort of dates me, I guess. Quake 1, Quake 2, Quake 3, did a bunch of mods. So sort of games were always something I was really interested in and spent a lot of time on. I learned a lot. I learned 3D modeling from making Quake 2 weapon mods, kind of. And then I actually I studied architecture, because when I sort of was done with school, I wanted to study, and there was no real game options, and I didn't want to do coding either because that seemed too dry. I wanted to do something more creative. So I started architecture, was done with that, and was like, fuck it, I want to do games instead, and went on doing games.
Right on. What do you? I don't know. Like, what do you still think about your architecture? Like, do you still does any of that still influence your work as a designer?
I mean, the architecture degree has irrevocably, man, damn, English is hard. Irrevocably, whatever. I'm not gonna repeat it a fourth time. A change in sort of bent my aesthetic sense. Like, people hate naked concrete walls, and I love them. That's just what happens to you, I guess. So I think it sort of influenced my aesthetic sensibilities a lot, and it's also sort of given me a sharper sort of focus as a designer in general. Because even though it sort of feels like it's very different, architecture and game design are actually sort of close. Because in both cases, you're not the guy necessarily making everything, but you need to be the guy that sort of keeps craft and arts sort of in balance and make sure the thing gets built, functions, and is sort of aesthetically pleasing. Like, is that sort of an answer, I guess?
It is.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm sitting here looking, trying to figure out how the heck I'm going to win this fight.
Yeah, you're actually fighting one of the bosses that I tweaked down a bit. I hope you updated your game on Steam.
Nope.
He's like, he was actually the one that I got the most complaints about, which is funny because in the beta test, not a lot of people complain about him. His effect is whenever one of his guys gets killed, he gets them back on his hands for cheaper and can play him again, which basically just means he never runs out of guys. And in the early release version, the effect would trigger for every guy you kill. So if it doesn't matter how many you killed, as long as he had room in his hand, he would get them back. And now it's been changed to it only triggers on the first guy you kill. So it's sort of the question is, which one do you want to pick off? Or in this case, which one will he run against you to get back? So it becomes a more active player choice. It's not like, all right, whatever I do, he's gonna get them back. It's right, which one do I want to take off is the least bad for me to give him back to him. So that's interesting, I find.
Luckily I got past him. Woo!
When we were talking before the stream, you mentioned like another similar tweak you've had to make where there was some system that you changed so that it became more involved on the player side, so it became a more strategic thing too. Yeah.
Which was another boss, which was always, whenever you dealt damage to him with the follower you would die. So now it's always the first one each turn, so the question is, which one of mine am I going to sacrifice to make room for the other people? Which makes them a lot more interesting. I need to do a bunch of other tweaks, like, for example, the Glory Seeker you just fought. He always gets his people back, and his deck has a lot of synergy with stuff that does effects when they enter battle. So he puts them out, gets an incidental effect, he loses them, gets them back, puts them out again. And I sort of had to lower the synergy of sort of the enemy decks in the early levels a little bit, because if he just, pumps out stuff all the time, he just gets too strong when your deck is still sort of trying to find its footing. Like in the first map is currently still sort of the hardest, because your deck is sort of unoptimized. You're sort of trying to sort of get stuff together to build up a strategy, find some equipment that synergizes with something you can build, and then sort of find people to put in there to make it stronger and stronger. And early on, if the enemies are just really well sort of synergized, you'll have trouble sort of keeping pace.
Nice. Brian, I'm going to do a two-parter question where I pose something and then you polish it, okay?
Sure.
So you talked earlier about wanting to kind of create a world. So it's going to kind of segue into narrative stuff a little bit. And then you had mentioned that that fight in Mass Effect with Saren, which was like one of my favorite moments in games ever. So
I love Mass Effect 1.
It's so good. The other games never quite captured the narrative
sometimes
side.
Watch the YouTube video of the conversation with Sovereign, the first one you have, because it's just such an awesome. God, I get goosebumps.
Oh yeah, like
it's
playing through that
awesome,
was like this moment.
I loved it.
But I kind of want to ask, I haven't played the game, Brian has, so I want to kind of segue into more about like the narrative side of things and how that kind of that initial thought made it carry throughout the game, or if it didn't, or kind of go from there. So I don't know if Bryant, you can elaborate as someone who's played the game more on that.
I think it does. I mean, I'd say my only comment is that the convoy still feels a little interpersonal. Like, even though there's a whole crowd of people down here, I love this graphic representation of all my units. I've gotten a little attached to some of them as they get kills, but if I'm being frankly honest, it's still missing a little bit of that Oregon Trail. X person you cared about has died of dysentery. Where that band.
Oh, it's called dysentery. I would have said dysentery.
Our language stinks. Look, we're not here to debate the English language, guys.
I was like 10 when I discovered that one. It was a horrible word.
Learning.
I think the underlying theme is very, very obvious and clear. And
but what is it? How would you describe it? This is not a quiz. There's no wrong answer.
Oh, there's a wrong answer, all right. There's always a wrong answer when you're hosting a stream. No. Okay, so I got the sense when I'm playing this game, like, I am searching for almost an unattainable goal, like we're looking for, like, we're on a journey to the Holy Land, if you will, like that kind of, that's very instinctual as I'm going, like, I'm going somewhere that no one believes I can go, like, we're like being on a sacred mission like that, and having this crew of followers with me, my sense for them is, like, occasionally, like when they show up in the chats, like, I can see when their name is highlighted in green, and I get the, that they've done something that helps me out. And I know that these are the people who will get me there. What's interesting to me is that I get way more sense of character from the people I meet in this game, from the shamans, from the guides who I couldn't afford to hire, and so it got some of my people killed. The thing we're pushing against, the other people in this world, the people we encounter, give me way more of a sense of the world and the sense of how people are. And it's interesting because, like, you sort of get from the idea of an apocalypse that everything's dying. But what I love about my sense of this game is that everything actually feels pretty alive. Like, everyone's got a way of living. The slave stuff is sadly not cool, and that's a very light way to put it. No. Like, Jesus Christ. The slavery thing is the only thing where I'm like, wow, this is, like, the biggest sense I have that the world is not right. But, like, there is also a sense that, like, people are alive. So those are the things that have stuck with me as a player so far. Like these militaristic factions that have popped up. I thought it was interesting. I was paying attention to, I think I have in here some units in my convoy. That's not the right deck. That's not the right button. Over here, there's a couple units who have kind of more of a colonial outlook about them, like they're wearing the
Rash Guard.
The Rash Guard, yeah. And I have one of them, the Scion
guy.
The
strategist down there, I think, too.
Yeah, I have a strategist right here. Unless the glasses, you would argue, are a little more Western and colonized. But there's sort of some more. But, like, there's an interesting mix of, like, and it's not even along, like, racial lines. Like, you can sort of tell the difference between the Spark Shaman and the Shifty Scavenger here. Although this guy just looks like he's a YouTuber. If the YouTuber is the ultimate colonist, I don't know. There are some sort of like I like that sense of it. I like the sense that there are ways that people, who seek power have dressed themselves. I like how there are people who are just sort of trying to get by who have dressed themselves. It gives me a sense of place in being. I know this is a question for you, but I guess I am the interviewed right now. But yeah, that's my sense. Here we go. The Scion Instigator. Like, look at this. Like, the guy's got a suit. He's got not just a suit. He's wearing like a high-necked
fancy shirt.
Yeah. Hair slicked back. Man, it looks like he gets to own a comb. But yeah, that's where I'm at with the game, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of what I was aiming for. I sort of agree with your assessment that the people in the convoy don't get enough character. In hindsight, I feel like the event system is the one thing that isn't quite where it should be. I did it by myself, most of it. I didn't write all the events because that's way too much anyway. But I had to sort of, at some point just sort of get it done. Mm-hmm. But I think especially the event system would have benefited. Like, there's a whole bunch of events that are just like, hey, you meet some people, let's fight. Mm-hmm. If I would have just scrapped those, put markers on the map, all right, this is a fight, start the fight, and then have the guy on the other side give you like a one-line bark of like, I'm gonna make you my slaves. That's enough. Like, we don't need all this text. It's great for world building, but it's a lot of craft. I would have rather sort of boiled down to fewer events and have them be more complex, and have more events sort of involve your people on sort of like strings where they, like, one of your guys is he's a war criminal. this is a story, and it's randomly we pick one of your guys every time, or like every fifth match you get a war criminal. We pick one of them, he's a war criminal, and if you don't kill him, you can have the story that sort of sometimes like, and then you get to a milestone and sort of interacts with a milestone in different ways based on which of these people you have. That'd be super cool, but
yeah, I think
only
that
so
was
much I can do.
the gist of like what the question I was trying to figure out words for before was you like with all the fights where you mentioned kind of like tweaking them so there's more strategic player choice. I was wondering if there's like a similar thread in the narrative elements of the game or the conversations you have or the events.
I mean, sort of the one thing that I think really helps the event system is there's moments where the event pops up and there's a picture of one of your guys on the left, and he goes like, "Hey, I can do something," or "I have some." Like there's some extra text. Like the game, basically what it does is it looks for a specific faction of specific rarity. Like, do you have a beast that's at least a rare? And then that unlocks options where you go like, all right, let the beast snarl at these people to intimidate them, or send that guy to run a distraction because he's a bandit and he's good at distracting, or make that guy blow something up because he's from the Union, and the Union is sort of, they blow things up. And that's where sort of the people become a little bit more fleshed out. But it's still sort of, it doesn't give them a lot of character because there's not a lot of personality behind these because it's very little moments. But that's really, really interesting things, I think.
No, I do like the composition of your party can kind of play into these random encounters or give you additional things you wouldn't have without that specific party member. So that's great. I like that.
I think we only have a few minutes left here. I really want to finish this fight. We're going to wrap up today. Thank you all for watching.
When you got headshot, you're good.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm gonna make sure that guy's out of the way, and then steadily wear this guy down. Thank you all for joining us on the GDC Twitch channel today. We are thrilled to be joined by Martin. The game is Nowhere Profit, published by No More Robots. We forgot to disclose up front that Nowhere Profit, which is published by No More Robots.
Yes.
Is advised. No more robots specifically is advised by Simon Carles, who is GDC bossman, GDC vice president in charge of GDC. Blah blah blah. There's a connection. We forgot to mention up top. Sorry about that. He helped out on this game, so we would like to both give him credit and acknowledge a disclosure. Disclosures are important.
He spent a lot of time making sure my English isn't terrible in the event.
Yeah, right on. Excuse me, I'm just gonna from there, we would also like to invite folks who are following us to officially follow us, to click on the follow button here on the GDC Twitch channel, because if you like other cool games that are coming out this year, there's a chance we might have an interview with the developers. We are working to talk to the folks behind Elsinore right now. I've reached out to talk to some folks behind, hopefully, games like Church in the Darkness, and oh god, there's another one that I'm actually trying to line up. Oh yeah, Creature in the Well. Creature in the Well, we're hopefully going to have a stream with them. With that, sweet, good timing. I'm going to actively wrap things up. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you for the question that we got from chat. Alyssa, thank you for helping out. And Martin, as always, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye.